There are specific conventions you should follow to properly quote lines of poetry in your essay. Now, I understand that in the first drafts we had not discussed this, so I don't expect those drafts to reflect this precision, but I do expect you to correct any errors you made in quoting lines of poetry for the final draft that you submit for a grade. So we will go over a few of the main conventions that I think that you will need to know. First, always make sure that you connect the quotation to your own sentence. Don't ever put a quotation alone by itself. You have to introduce it. You have to connect it to your own sentence. So here's some examples of different ways you could do that. Whitman describes the soul's position in the universe with these lines. So you're going to introduce your quotation, similar to saying so-and-so says, right? But you're going to be speaking of in the poem, or the poem suggests, or the speaker in the poem. So here we have another example of introducing a quotation. In the italicized portion of the poem, the bird sings, and it would be the line that the bird sang. Or finally, the shepherd speaks of, and the quoted portion of the poem. So do make sure that you connect the quotation to your own sentence. Then you give and cite the quoted material. When you are quoting a couple of lines of poetry, use a forward slash to indicate the end of each line, except for the last one. And you're going to cite line numbers in parentheses after the quotation marks and before the period. So here we're going to quote two lines. Notice I'm connecting it to my sentence. Whitman describes the soul's position in the universe in these lines. Open my quotation marks. And you, O my soul, where you stand. Then that's line 6, slash line 7, surrounded, detached in measureless oceans of space. Close your quotations, open your parentheses, indicate the line numbers. You would just count them on the poem. You can count them. These poems are short. And then the period goes after the parentheses. It does not go here, it goes here. So that's if you are quoting a couple of lines of poetry. Obviously, if you're just quoting one, you won't need this slash. You would just put your quotation marks here, no end punctuation, parentheses, 6, period. All right, when quoting only a word or phrase, cite the line number immediately after the quotation marks, even if the sentence continues. So sometimes you might want to pull out just one word or just one phrase and quote that, and that's perfectly fine. You don't have to ever quote an entire line. Sometimes it makes more sense just to quote a word or phrase, fits better into your own sentence perhaps. So check out this example. In the italicized portion of the poem, the bird sings a carol in praise of, quote, lovely and soothing death, close quote. Then the line number. And then notice how the sentence continues to help the persona overcome his grief, period. Okay, so you can do that right in the middle of the sentence if you so choose to quote that way. All right, let's say you want to leave out some lines of poetry. Let's say you want to leave out the end of one line and the beginning of another line, or the end of a couple of lines. You show that you are leaving words out through the use of the ellipsis dots. So this is just the dot, dot, dot. So here we're connecting we're introducing our quotation, connecting the quotation to our own sentence. The poet's sympathies are not for the living, but for the dead. Then the quotation, they themselves were fully at rest. And notice that there's more of that line, but we're leaving it out. Then the slash, and we're going to another line. The living remained and suffered. And then we leave out the rest of that line. And we have the line numbers and then the period. So that's if you choose to leave something out. If you make changes, you're going to use a square bracket to show that you added something to the original text. And sometimes you have to do this for clarification or to make the syntax work with your own sentence. The persona brings visions of the varying beauty of the entire country to adorn the burial house of him he loves. Now notice I made some changes to that line. In the original, this was a capital T, and I made it a lowercase t, so I had to indicate that. Here, I wanted to make it clear that we were talking about a person someone else loves, right? So I added the explanatory he. And then in order to make the subjects and verbs agree, I had to add an S to the end. So notice, every time I made a change, I put that in a square bracket. And then you close your quotations. You close your parentheses around the line number and then the period. Many people want to avoid those brackets altogether by choosing just to quote phrases instead. And see how that does flow a little bit more smoothly. The persona brings visions of the varying beauty of the entire country to adorn the burial house of the one he loves. This is correct. This is probably better because it's a little less clunky. If you want to quote more than 3 lines of poetry, indent 10 spaces and omit the quotation marks. And for whatever crazy reason, the period goes before the parentheses and the line numbers. It's just a convention. Cannot tell you why it is that way. So here we have our introduction of our quotation. And then notice, then we have our lines, indented 10 spaces, reproduced is exactly as they appear in the poem itself, no quotation marks, and the period followed by the line numbers. So those should cover pretty much any line pattern variation that you use in your essay. The most important thing to remember, however, is the very first slide. Connect the quotation to your own sentence. You need to introduce the quotation. So give this a shot as you begin to revise, and it's something we can certainly discuss in our conferences about your essays.